Welcome at BIDE podcast, the podcast of BIDE, Barcelona International Dance Exchange. We are now starting our 26th episode, and today we interview Christopher Matthews, an American-born choreographer and performance artist working from London. Chris holds a BFA from New York University Tisch School of the Arts and an MA in choreography from Trinity Laban. His video and performance works have been presented across the globe in a vast array of countries, ranging from the UK and USA to Guatemala, Taiwan, and Spain. Christopher's untitled video portrait, Radio Edit, took first prize at the Choreographic Captures competition, and his films have been in distribution across cinemas in Germany and Switzerland. Combining his background in photography and dance history with performance, Chris's works are intended to dialogue with the spectator on themes of voyeurism, criticism, gender, body image, working conditions, intersections of the classical and contemporary, icon versus self, pop culture and dance history. I'm sure we're about to have insights into a real array of artistic mediums. Chris, it's my absolute pleasure to be chatting with you today. At this point in time, what are you focusing on in your artistic life?
What am I? It's funny. Well, thank you for having me, first of all.
You're welcome.
My artistic life is it's interesting to be back after the pandemic, in the sense that artistic life sort of was the domestic for a while. So it's really nice to be back. And one of the things I'm now able to get back into is that I was working on a trilogy of dance pieces and so I'm able to now get back into working on that the final piece of this trilogy. Which I stumbled when I say dance pieces, because I actually think of my work more as sculptures or installations. I kind of refer to them as kinetic sculptures. So even though they're moving bodies and they're dancing and they're related to dance history, and I work with, dancers, not anyone who doesn't have a dance background, because I think there's some information and vocabulary in the body there too, though there are some really amazing performance artists who don't come from a dance background. But for me to connect to dance history, I work with dancers, but I call the works sculpture. And so I'm currently preparing to complete this final piece in this series. The first is my piece Lads, which is it's a duet between two performers, and they're looking at the history of masculinity in early modern dance, and how modern dance has related theories of masculinity back to kind of Plato's ideas and also fitness culture as well. And then the second piece is they're all duets actually, so I probably say duets many times, but basically it's a piece that looks at the intersection between, or what the object is, and the difference of an object in higher and lower, in the sense of the visual art plinth and the go-go boy kind of dancing box, which also for me found some connections to the Impressionist period and the ballet opera and the Paris opera, ballet rats, which were the corps de ballet working class performers. And so this final work that I'm working on is actually looking at performers over 60 and questioning desire and youth and the kind of romantic connection between the muse and the performer. And I kind of got interested in Macmillan's Romeo and Juliet, and focusing on the bedroom scene from that ballet. And so I'm kind of working with this material. And so what am I doing? I am contemplating what do I do with this idea of working with desire in dance history. But also I'm a little bit crazy. I just do whatever comes to me. So I've also started to draw. I've started to.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah, I've been making line drawings, which came out of the piece My Body's Number One, which is the go-go piece. And that work, My Body's Number One, so basically, like I said, it's looking at go-go boys and fine art nude sculptures or neoclassical sculptures, and how one is high art because it's in a museum on a box, a plinth, and one is low art because it's in a club and it's seedy. But we're both desiring the body. And like I said, I used the piece of a Paris Opera ballet rats, which were also doubled. And when they weren't working at the Corps de Ballet, they were also posing as muses for artists during the Impressionist period. So I started to look at also these bodies, and I started to make line drawings, which are basically just stick figures. But it makes it sound more nice when you say it's a line drawing. But basically I draw stick figures. And
amazing. And it's a form of art.
Remind me when I was living in New York City in 20, and me and my gay friends used to be like, so do you think he's gay? And we'd be like, well, check for broken lines. So basically I look at sculptures and I look at all the broken lines of the body. And that's what I draw. And I've been expanding that work into drawing, but not necessarily with pencils, like I've been doing with tape or other kind of materials to make these kind of drawings. So yeah, I mean, my artistic practice is kind of whatever I'm interested in doing.
Amazing.
Yeah. I also have ADHD, so that's why my like medium changes quite a lot, because I'm always like, oh, I need something new, okay, maybe I'll make necklaces right now. That's my practice.
Hey, it's all expression, isn't it? It's a form of expression. So it's interesting. You've covered quite a lot there, which is amazing. Thank you for being so generous at this stage in the podcast as well. But I think I'm going to revisit some of what you've just said a little bit later as we move forward, if that's all right. But
no problem,
can I just ask you, Chris, what drew you to dance in the first place? And I know what's really interesting, and I'm intrigued to unpick this description of kinetic sculptures a bit later on as well. But yeah, what drew you into, do you think you've always been artistic in the way that you communicate? Has there always been an artistry in you as a human, let's say, or as a young child? Or yeah, what's your story? What was your journey into dance?
Okay, well,
here we go.
My journey into dance was at the age of 5. I watched the television show Fame, and so I told my mother I would be a dancer.
Brilliant.
And it was basically two things. It was the television show Fame. It made me really love dance, and also Janet Jackson. So a lot of my work always references Janet Jackson. But because Janet Jackson, like, her music videos were so dance related, and
absolutely.
And I know everyone thinks of Michael Jackson as the dancer, but I could get into some full out arguments with people about how I think Janet Jackson performs more technical movement, where Michael Jackson, I feel, is much more of the free movement, improvisation or free movement, or that's where his lineage, I feel, it hits. But for me, Janet Jackson, like, her works were so technical, so choreographed, and her early choreographer, Tina, I was really interested in what she did with the body. And I think my favorite music videos ever and still is If, due to I think the choreography is just absolutely amazing. So yes, so there's my intro into dance, was the television show and Janet. And at one point Janet was in Fame, so my two worlds collided and it just blew me away. But then and then the practical idea is that I got quite lucky. So where I grew up in Virginia, there was a performing arts school. So from an early age, I could take dance as part of my everyday school training. So I would do my English, maths, and history and all that stuff. And then I would go and take dance classes.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really, it's almost like a happy accident, isn't it, I guess, in the sense that your geography really impacted, all that access to that training straight away impacted
it's
your
also
direction.
Weird because it's also, I grew up in a super, super military area. So the fact that there was also a performing arts school, it was also like a kind of like savior to me. I could, go away and not have to like be around all the kind of aggressive machismo kind of military energy, and I could be around creative arts.
Sure. And what was the, sorry, can I ask as well, just to interject while we're on that, what was the mix of gender, I guess, in that school? So in the performing arts context, if you, yeah.
It depends. It depended on the art form. So when I was in, when I was in the dance program, it was very mixed at certain times. So like there was some time where I was the only guy, and then there was a few years where there was like one other or two other. So it really was quite varied. When I was in, but I did it not just high school. So high school is when I maybe had one or two other male dancers in the program. But in middle school, which is, I don't know what the difference is here, but I was 10. But basically middle school, I was the only male dancer in the program. And so that was quite interesting for me. It was also very, quite alienating, but also, but I just was doing what I wanted to do. I wasn't really concerned with gender, and being the only male performer at that time. But I guess if I also talk about my entryway into dance, I think a pivotal year was when I turned 16, because for me, I think that was the year that I really changed as a dancer and really, I knew I always wanted to do it as a job or a career, but that was 15 and 16 was the year that I changed my way of working. I became more serious about it. I started going to some summer programs where actually where I was interacting with more male dancers. And so for me, I think that was the pivotal year. And I remember coming back after the summer, and even my teachers from that program was like, oh, something has really changed in you. And I still think about that summer where I decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And so I have to kind of work on it. And I have to start to, I started to really visualize myself dancing. And that, I could see myself doing the arabesque, I could see myself doing the movement. And that's where that kind of started to progress for me.
That's really nice, actually, that idea of looking, I don't know, as an external eye, if you like, back on yourself doing the movement. And I think that links quite nicely to, perhaps there's something there in I might just be drawing links, but this idea of kinetic sculptures as well, and observation, which I want to ask a little bit about later on, about observing and the spectator, if you like. So you trained in both the USA and the UK. You've experienced schools in both. So obviously at NYU, at Tisch School of the Arts, and then at Trinity Laban. How did you find the contrast? Was there a contrast for you between the two experiences?
Well, to be honest, my training, most of my sort of dance training is all from American kind of schools, and so and also in that very American conservatoire schools, which was about rigorous machines. We produce machines, turn more, leap higher, get more flexible. It was like and the consistency. I mean, I just look at, you look at American dance schools and they're literally training them for like dance war. And so for me, when I moved to the UK, I moved here to do a master's. And the reason I wanted to do a master's was I think I got bored with what I was doing, and I was like, well, I could just do this, and I just felt like I plateaued. Like I just had a good career. I was dancing with a couple of different choreographers and had steady work, and I could have just kept going on that and had a great, healthy career till this day. But I just felt like I need to do something different with my art form, and so, but I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't know how I was going to do something different, but I was craving to use dance in a different way than what I knew. So that's why I moved here to do my master's. So I don't think I can answer the question with a kind of comparison. I can just say it was a shift in my career. And what was kind of interesting was that I spent my master's trying to learn a new language in a way. It's because I felt like I had built habits in my dancing, and as well as most of the work I had done as a performer was kind of repertory work. So I had learned a lot of dance historical pieces, And I worked with one choreographer where I was developing new work, but we would perform it for a year or 2 years or 3 years. So it was really like repertory. And so in my master's, I wanted to undo all the vocabulary of others to understand what my pure movement is, like who am I? So I started to do this practice where I basically would stop using all the terms. And I actually sort of, I didn't stop, but I would work with dancers and I would try to use words to describe what I wanted instead of getting up and demonstrating with my body, because I wanted to try to challenge myself to see dance in a different way so I could use it in a different way.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
Really fascinating. Do you find now, so I know, I feel like we're going a little bit forward and back in time, but that's okay. Yeah. Do you find...
But that's my work's about forward and backwards in time.
Absolutely. So, hey, it's great, because I think, there's something that's very clear about this, this dual relationship. I don't know, there's a duality almost, a multifaceted approach to your work in many ways. And I think it's quite nice. There's a lot to unpick, which is exciting. I don't think we'll get to unpick everything in one podcast, but maybe we'll have you back.
Podcast too.
Yeah,
cool.
Absolutely. We'll do like a whole series of Christopher Matthews. It's great. I've forgotten what I was going to ask now, Christopher. So
I was talking about the changing the vocabulary, and you said this thing about going backwards and forwards.
Yes, absolutely. So nowadays, when you teach, because I understand you teach as well, obviously you wear many hats. Yes. But when you teach, do you find that you draw from that still? Do you what kind of language do you tend to use with your students nowadays?
So, gosh, maybe I'm hypocritical.
Not at all. Don't worry. Things change. Things shift. Yeah.
No. But actually, what I learned by having this rigorous ballet and modern dance background in my training. So I trained in classical ballet, and then I also trained in mostly Hawkins technique until I got to NYU. I think what I learned was if you have the skill and craftsmanship, then you can do anything with it.
Sure.
And so the classes that I teach now are straight up old-fashioned technique, tendus, dégagés, really trying to build an understanding of the craft. And then I have other classes where I talk about the students about how to do things differently and how to have perspectives on the form or on the history, so that they understand, okay, why is it still important to do an amazing proper tendu and fully turned out and buoyant plie, So I teach a technique class that's very it's got all the elements. It's not actually even, it's not any of this kind of release technique that where you're rolling on the floor, kind of like finding that. It's really standing up, finding your posture, finding the arm placement, finding the looseness in the hips, using the lower abdominals, articulating through the feet, that kind of material. I'm a technician, and that technique allows me to use what I've been doing differently. It's and that's something I really get interested in when I'm like, how do you do something? Like, I've been taking ceramics recently, and I'm like, how do you do it? What is it? So then I can play with it.
Sure.
Yeah.
And I think you have to understand a foundation before you can then challenge it to an extent, don't you? Or at least understand where something stems from. And I think history is quite intrinsic within your work as well. And it sounds like, it's almost like this cabinet of tools that you have a base, and then you can either choose to throw them up in the air and see what lands, or you can really follow them quite strictly and revisit those foundations.
Completely. And that's something related to the question you asked me earlier about what's the difference between the US and the UK. And something I found very interesting in my US training was that dance history was super, super, super important. Now, even though that we understand dance history now is also really problematic, and we need to question what has been documented as dance history. But but we really learned dance history. We really learned where things came from and what was and how they progressed to something else. And we learned the choreographers who were doing that. We learned the dance styles that were doing that. And when I moved to the UK, I found that dance history was not necessarily, well, in some programs I've come across don't even teach dance history. And I find it really, and so it's interesting that I started to get really concerned with dance history in my work when I started to realize how it's not being taught in the UK. And I don't know why that is, because I haven't participated in setting up the education system in the UK. But I didn't realize how much I loved dance history, and because I had been working in so many historical works and stuff, that I didn't think that I loved dance history as much as I did until, that whole, it's missing. And I would talk to my students about, choreographers, and they just be like, who? And I'd be like, no, you really need to know that name. Like, honestly, I will ask you again next week, and you better know who that name is. Like,
I think, do you think there's again, I'm interjecting, this is a really interesting conversation, and I think that I'll bring it back in a sec, but I think that dance, because I remember when I was training, I learned quite a lot about dance history, and obviously there was a massive portion of that was centered around, and I'm sure, like you mentioned and referred to, and it's a whole other podcast on rewriting dance history and re-understanding the narrative, I guess. Yeah. But I think a lot of the history that we learned was also about the developments and the shifts within American society. And I think that did shape quite a lot of modern dance in particular, and how we have come to understand modern dance today, and then the shift that then brought into, London and the UK. And I think maybe there's something about, I don't know. I'm not going to try and unpick why, again, the education system is the way it is. And I think there are some institutions, and I pray that there are some institutions that do still hold history, the importance of history in teaching. But I understand, I understand what you're saying there. And I wonder if there's something, because of the roots, the developments in certain styles, particularly in jazz dance, that because of the roots being in the USA, I wonder if that has something to do with that ownership of the history in some ways.
Yeah, I don't know. I really don't know. And I don't want to say, like, I've always tried to be careful of saying that, a lot of these things are streaming from American modern dance. But, like, I started learning ballet from a Russian Vaganova school where, our turnout was super forced, and I mean, we stepped on a scale as we walked into the dance studio.
My goodness.
It was very serious. Everything mattered. And, you watch that old documentary, Children on Theatre Street, and I understand, just to get into the Russian Academy, they measured your bones and your parents' bones, and they measured your turnout possibility, and I understand that when I look back at my training in Vaganova, which was traumatic, but I understand why, because it's a system that was created, and it was a system to already weed out who's not going to be flexible and who's not going to have long bone structures and that kind of stuff. But again, that creates a problem, and which my work is questioning. It creates a problem of what is the image of a performer, or what is the image of a dancer.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so for me, it's my work. It's always about body image, like what is that image that's being created, and which is why it led me to be more visual art, because I also, when I look at dance performances, they're visual, and they are, some of them have frames of a proscenium, some have the costumes and the lighting, and it's all a visual communication, and but it's through movement, and that's why I feel it's appropriate to utilize art history to question dance history, or the framework of the institutions of art, of visual art.
Absolutely, that framework is so close, and I think it's that creative expression, and also the different languages that exist within that. There's something really fascinating about you, again, and you've touched on it with this use of the term kinetic sculptures rather than dance as such. And there's something really fascinating to me. I was lucky enough to come and see a recent event that you curated, I believe, at Sadler's Wells, My Body is an Exhibition. And it was a really interesting experience. And we're not here to talk about my kind of reception of it. However, it was fascinating to walk around this space that, you know, is so linked to dance within London in particular and within the UK. And I think to walk around it with the gallery goggles on, if you like. So we were invited to promenade around the space and to happen upon the dancers and the kinetic sculptures, if you like, within the spaces. And there's something really quite beautiful about spectatorship within your work. And I wonder if you could, well, I have two questions really. And I don't know if it does link to reality TV, but this idea of voyeurism seems to be a theme very much within, and you speak about that in your approach. So is it a very deliberate decision to create a state of mind within the spectator that is akin to an art gallery in order to receive a work like that exhibition, the My Body's an Exhibition?
Well, it's what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to make the spectator maybe not have a visual art mindset, but to say that you will have to work. This is not entertainment where you sit and consume. This is that you will have to think about what you're looking at and consider why you're looking at it. And why you're looking at it with such with opinions or judgments or already pre-formed ideas. So I want the spectator to consider themselves whilst watching, and so in a way it is asking them to sit back and to view it from a visual art performance, where more people are looking at work to look at the details and question the details than looking at dance performances, where I think dance performances and musicals and theater like that, I feel like people also have think of it as part of entertainment. And I talk to my students a lot about how musical theater, how West End and Broadway are all connected to tourism. And they're closer to tourism than performing arts, because it's about enjoying your time and going out and seeing something and not having to think. It's like watching a television show and just enjoying it, taking in the images and the information. Where when I'm making my my works, I'm thinking about, well, the spectator, I want them to have a dialogue. There's that, you know, not to get philosophical, but there maybe is that Roland Barthes question of death of the author, which I think is an important text to me. And I think about that text really talks about like, well, that books don't come alive until someone reads them. And when they read them, the author slowly disappears. And we have our own histories and critiques on it. You know, I work with an artist who's always reminding me of other things that my works aren't about, but that could be part of the dialogue. And it's great that and when I make work, I actually invite lots of different people in to have dialogues about a masculinity. And even though I'm working from my particular autobiography within masculinity and dance history, as an example, you know, I invited once an anthropologist who looks at masculinity in trans culture and has written a lot about transitioning, and also they spoke about a little bit about the performativity of masculinity until it becomes fully embodied and this is their research, so I'm also paraphrasing, but but I'm not making work about trans community. But I want to hear what the spectrum is, and what other voices are concerned with in a similar topic, so that I can also be aware of what I don't want to represent or appropriate in my work.
Sure.
So that's why. I know I went around a question a bit, but I want the audience to have a critical view, which is why I don't have a company, but I always show my work under the title Formed View. So Christopher Matthews' Formed View. And that is for two different reasons. One is that I'm acknowledging I'm not the author of the work or the only author of the work, because the works are live. So people are making them, there are dancers who are interpreting it and they're authors of the work as well. I'm shaping the way that I want the audience to view it. So I'm forming that critique and how I want people to see the piece so that they get the content, the content that I want. But I do know that the work is also being created by the performers and everyone else I've had dialogues with. So that's why it's important for the audience to also be a part of that dialogue, because I'm not interested in dance jargon, where it's dance for dance sake. I really want that it's a communication. And so my Body as an Exhibition was also, it was a proposition for me to, as this wildcard program, which Sadler's Wells has, where they invite an artist to curate something around their own research and work that they're making. And usually artists show a piece of theirs and then invite other people. But since I make gallery work, I invited artists to present their work around a few different themes. And then I curated the experience, but I wanted to use the space, which is helping with the framing. I wanted to use the space. It was kind of a love letter to theaters, how much I've spent so much time in theaters and how they, and the intimacy that people don't know what happens, because people just see when the curtain goes up. They don't see the dressing rooms. They don't see the rehearsal rooms. They don't hear the conversations and the critique that has led to the final product. So for a while, I used to say that I was, my works were a process, a performing of the process, but then I realized it's not performing of the process. It's just using the process as an art.
Sure.
So I know you, when you walk through the hallways of that exhibition, you heard a sound score of me giving stories from when people critiqued my body as a performer.
Yes, I remember that. It was very powerful, actually, to hear you. And we didn't get a chance to talk much after the show. And so go on. Sorry, I interjected there. Go on.
And so this is the thing, is that I wanted the audience to think about actually the performer. What have they done or dealt with, or what type of material goes into making them who they are. I was just really affected the other day. I watched I watched this film with Tom Hanks about Mr. Rogers, and then I started going down this rabbit hole of watching things about Mr. Rogers. And he when he accepted his Emmy Award, asked everyone in the audience to take 10 seconds and be silent and think about the people who made you. And made you who you were to be here. And it was so powerful. And I just think, as performers, we are everyone. I know I unpicked in my master's, I tried to unpick all that information of being okay, this movement is from that choreographer, this movement is from that choreographer. But now I'm okay with it. I understand where it has made up who I am and how I move. But people need to know that it's that there's this harsh critique in a sense of of how you are made. And that's what I want. And that gets the audience to participate. They have to listen, they have to think, then they have to be well, who is this body they're talking about? And that's why the show is called My Body as an Exhibition, which is a lyric from a Janet Jackson song. So it's all brings
it back. Which takes it full circle, yeah.
I mean, someone the other day when I was talking about my work and I was oh, this, and they just steamed in, they're and pop culture. And I'm yeah, I mean, always. I love a good 90s pop culture.
Who doesn't, right?
I know. And more so than I like pop culture now, but I am totally into pop culture now, but I feel my informative years from 10 to mid-20s, where I was really still learning. I was in that early Saturn, before my Saturn returns, where I was still in youth and I was consuming information. So that's pop culture for me, because that's what made me who I am and what I'm interested in.
Absolutely. And also, I guess that's the time where we are very impressionable. You know, between 10 and 20 years, you're really starting to shape certain aspects of your personality and your character and that individuality as well. And I think with training in dance in particular, and within certain contexts, there is this hypercriticism where we're almost asking questions about a body that hasn't even developed yet necessarily fully. And there's something quite, there's a massive responsibility there from a teaching perspective, obviously, that I'm sure we could talk about all day, but hearing those snippets of your story about, you know, words that potentially has affected you or had created a specific relationship with your own body image or how that was perceived, or, you know, these little snippets really took me on a journey from my own perspectives. And I think you were incredibly successful in doing that and in almost asking the audience to consider that history within themselves as well.
And having it over the it played over the loudspeaker, and also which as you walked past dressing rooms, you could hear it coming from behind the doors. So it was, you know, it's also very interesting that, you know, you don't see it. But again, I think, for me, I've always looked at dance history and what issues have come up. And so this trilogy I'm working on at the moment, or completing the final work, is started from a position of, why did I start with masculinity? Because I realized, after working with a choreographer who is a heterosexual cis male, and I was performing a piece that was reproducing poses by two other heterosexual cis white males, and I was like, wait a second, this is the male gaze. This is also the essence of homoeroticism, which is the male gaze onto the male body without a sexual encounter. And I was just thinking, like, wait a second, in all my work as a dancer, have I just been implicitly performing masculinity and heterosexuality? And I'm like, of course I have. I've been in a ballet, you know, like I have been I've never been a prince, because I never had the body shape to be a prince. So that's an interesting also question in my work, is why I have never been a prince in a ballet. But I never was the white tights kind of person. I was always the black tights. But I've been a townsperson, and of course, as a townsperson, you have your wife and you're doing a little character dance, and, you know, I was like, wow, even though it wasn't, I wasn't told, I just was passively performing something who I am not. And I also don't feel I have an issue with that, but I do think, like, I had to question for myself why I didn't question it. And so that's what led me down these pathways of understanding. Plus, also, I realized going on dates with people, and I'd be like, well, and I would take him to dance performances, and I'd be like, what'd you like? And they'd be like, oh yeah, the butt was cute and there's tight. So that's really all people care about. It's like sexualizing the body, and dance also has a problematic history with sexualizing the body, and especially ballet has a problem, and it still has a problem, and we're trying to challenge those systematic problems of over-sexualizing and consent, and how do you look at a body, how do you present a body, how do you touch a body, how do you ballet companies have always had issues. I mean, that's what the second piece is about, is how these young ballerinas were also sex workers in Paris to make money, because the ballet company didn't make enough, so their mothers would be in the bar selling them to rich businessmen. So after they come off stage, then they would, and then also for artists, they would pose for artists, which also they could be, when the artist was done making the sculpture or the painting, they could have sex with him. And for me, I found this quite problematic, that it's deeply embedded in our history of dance. And so that's why I've been challenging sensuality and desire in my work. Like, desire is a big thing. I'm also making another work at the moment. It's a trio, and it's revisiting Je by Nijinsky, which is a trio which he originally created, which was of a fantasy for Diaghilev, where Diaghilev wanted him to have sex with another guy, and so he tried to remake this fantasy as a ballet. Of course, it was problematic, so then they changed it to one man and two women. So I'm trying to bring that back as a trio for three men, but it's in the ballet. I don't know if you're familiar with the ballet, but the ballet takes place like sort of with a tennis match as well.
Ah, okay, yes.
And so I'm trying to also think about how sports culture has become an element of desire, but also problematic, because we desire this as, queer male and queer bodies and gay bodies. We desire this athleticism that also oppresses us. And so I'm turning it into a wrestling match.
Wow, okay.
So
please let me know when this is on.
Yes, and it has a history to also. Last year, in 2019, there were two events that happened in Europe that inspired me to think about this work also. And one of them was the Euros, and how when the Euros were here in the UK, and how all these men were in Leicester Square and really performing this toxic masculinity and destroying the city, climbing the buildings. And I really thought, this sports culture is creating a very problematic issue. And then I also thought at the same time that summer was the summer in Spain where the young male Sammy was attacked and killed during that attack. And so I started to think about this culture of desiring the oppressor. And so that's why so the work almost looks like a wrestling match. It almost looks like someone is being pinned down. It's going to play with a lot of those elements of the boundaries between desire and abuse.
It's fascinating. It really is. And I think there's something in there. I want to ask you about reality TV, because I'll explain just randomly. But I think it's this idea of, okay, so the desire, and I don't mean at all to belittle, because you mentioned abuse, if you like, there as well. That's relationship, that's that blurred line in some ways between desire and abuse. And I think that it's almost like this. So many people talk about guilty pleasures, don't they? About certain television programs, or popular culture seems to have this lower art kind of gauze over it, if you like, or labeling. So you have quite a history with reality TV from reading your biography. And I understand that you were a judge and contemporary choreographer on a popular Angolan dance reality TV series called Bounce.
Yes.
And you've also been a contestant on various reality shows in the US and the UK. So can you maybe just talk a little bit in relation to what you've been talking about, this idea of image and, I guess, observing people and voyeurism, and how this connects, or how may this have shaped or impacted on your work? And maybe just basically, I'm just being very nosy to hear about your experience with reality TV.
Oh gosh,
linked, okay.
It was fun, but so fake. And I remember one of the shows I was on as a contestant, I signed a contract that was like 100 pages long and basically just said that we can edit the TV show to make you look like you have committed the worst crime ever, even though you probably did nothing. But it was this kind of interesting thing around this performing the self. That for you to be important, you have to have a story.
Yeah.
And again, it's that whole performing celebrityism, and I always feel like, well, again, like in dance history, there's always also the celebrity, the names, the image, performing who you are, and on and off stage, like. I've made some works around also how club spaces have participated in celebrityism in dance history. So like, not Nijinsky, Nureyev would go out to Studio 54 because he really thought that part of his career and participate in the success of his career was being in the public and being visible and being seen and being desired from that point of view. So he would go to nightclubs just to be seen because he knew that he needed to perform the celebrity. And so reality television was a little bit like that. And I remember when I got cut from the show, I knew I was going to get cut. They kind of, you kind of already know everything. So I knew I was going to get cut. And the first show I ever did, and I went to my exit interview and they were filming me and they're like, so, you're going home. Are you sad? And I was like, no, I'm so happy. I came here. I decided I was going to do this. I put myself forward. I really put myself out there. And I'm just happy to have made it this far to into the top 50. And I just was really like, okay, I'm just felt like I achieved something. And I think I did the best I could do. I have no regrets. And they were like, oh, okay, but are you sad?
Oh, no.
And I was like, no. And they're like, but you're not sad. And then I was like, oh, I get this. And I'm like, okay, yeah, well, I am a little disappointed.
Yeah, it's indirect direction. Yeah.
Yeah. And also what was kind of interesting is that we did 15 takes. So when I went to Vegas, we did 15 takes of me saying I went to Vegas. So, you see this television show and all of a sudden someone gets their ticket and they're like, I'm going to Vegas. And I did that. They were like, run through this door and scream it, run up the stairs and scream it, run out the front door of the theater and scream it, run down the street and scream it. So we had all these different ways. I mean, none of those made it onto the television show, but because, everybody who went to Vegas also did 15 different takes, so it was just like, I just found it quite interesting that I was like, wow, there's this performing reality. And actually I'm just, and whatever I can do to make the most interesting of myself is that's how it works. And another one where I was a contestant, they were like, this is your cameraman. You want to get on the show, you give him content.
Wow.
And that's kind of how it works. It's quite interesting. It was a bit different when I was a judge on one because it was more about being it was more about the contestants, and which I really felt was really more appropriate, and it was quite interesting. But again, I knew that there were sequences where I had to perform the rehearsal and perform how I felt about the contestants, perform how I felt about the experience and where we were, and if we went to the beach one day on our day off, what that experience was like. And it was quite interesting to me, that element of where performance becomes, it's heightened. And actually, going back to one of the shows where I was a contestant, before they turned the cameras on, the lead judge had said to everyone in the audience, he said, we are making a TV show here. So we are going to say the most extreme things. So we're either going to really play it up how great you are or really play it up how bad you are. And it may just be mediocre, but we're really, you can't take any offense because what we're trying to do is just create an exciting television show. So you may have fallen out of your turn, but we will make it like the worst thing you've ever done. And it's interesting around that playing. And I think that's, for me, this sense of being desired and being an image that is a sellable product. And that's what we are when we're dancers. We're objects, we are just objects selling something to an audience.
Sure.
And we do have subjectivity, and that's what makes a good performer, is subjectivity. But and that's some of the things I've been studying. I've been studying a lot, is around how do you access subjectivity. I mean, I'm working with a choreographer at the moment as a dancer for them, and I just think, well, what is my subjectivity? Who am I? And how do I take their concept of what they're trying to portray and what they're trying to portray with me, and also include my skill sets and my interest in performing? So what does it mean to perform, and how do you perform? So I guess I've started also to analyze performing as a craft, not just a dance technique, but what do I do with it? And it's interesting that I want to just I want to do things that are more about subjectivity than the leaps and the turns and the kicks and all that kind of stuff that I'm still trained to do, but I'm more interested in subjectivity than machine skill.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. It's fascinating just hearing. I'm aware that, I mean, I could literally talk to you all day, to be fair. I think we need to do like,
I mean, I have
trilogy.
time, so if you want to go another 20 minutes, I'm totally cool.
I know. Okay, well, I will ask a couple more questions. I'm sure we will go another 20 minutes, no gas. But I think there's so, I said earlier on about multifaceted, and that your work is very multifaceted, but I think also as a person, you can really clearly see the links of life and this idea of embodied history. So your experiences feeding into and informing your practice, if you like. And, you say about, we've learned that you're taking ceramics classes and that you're doing line drawings or stickmen, whichever way you want to refer to them.
Let's put line drawings in the publication, but let's just call them stick figures.
Absolutely. line drawings. No, I know. And hey, stickmen are just as artistic and expressive, right? But yeah. But I think
anybody wants to buy them, come on.
Yeah, do a plug. That's fine. We can add a link in if you wish.
Sure.
But I think that there is this idea of performing self, and I feel that you are a very creative person in many aspects, and open, and there's an openness to your work, but also this introspective. I don't mean that in a positive way. This introspection and analysis that is intrinsic to your practice, but also that you offer as a choice to the spectator to invite them to think and to observe with a curious eye in your work, which is really beautiful. It's lovely. It's very interesting hearing you speak, because we almost that artistry is very clearly reflected in the way that you communicate. I don't know if that's fair to say. I hope it is, which I find fascinating. So thank you for that. It's fascinating listening to you. I'm looking through my questions and thinking, where do we go next? This idea of embodied history.
Yeah.
It creates a really lovely image about almost writing our own history and also leaving a legacy. What's your, let's look forward. So let's look towards the future. You've spoken about a few works that you're creating and what you're concerned with now. Do you believe in the idea of leaving a legacy? So you're carrying this embodied history.
I don't know. I think when I was growing up as a young dancer, I thought about legacy. And it's quite interesting. One of the reasons I'm in the UK is that when I was 16 and in that transformative years, that year where I was like, I really want to do this. This is what I need to do. I need to work harder and be more critical with myself. I made a life plan that I pretty much stuck to. So I was like, okay, well, I'm going to go to NYU for university. I'm going to work as a dancer in New York City for a while. And then I want to move to the UK and get a master's and then become a choreographer. And I kind of stuck with the kind of elements of that. And which is even scary because I said I was going to go to Laban, and I even did end up.
Oh, wow. I mean, you planned your life very clearly.
I did plan my life very clearly. So I think I was planning a legacy that I don't have. And I think I've kind of learned that we don't need legacies anymore. And I feel I got inspired by an American choreographer and dancer and visual artist that nobody knows. And his name is Paul Swann. And so a boyfriend of mine gave me a book for my birthday called The Most Beautiful Man in the World. And Paul Swann was actually an American dancer, and he made his own work. He didn't really dance for anybody else. He was a little bit narcissistic, actually. And there's a reason why he's narcissistic. But basically, Paul Swann made his own dance works, and he also made sculptures and visual art. But he he went to Greece, and they put on on the front of the newspaper that he's the most beautiful man in the world because he looks like the Greek Olympians. Mm-hmm. And so Paul Swann was at one point one of the most famous people in the world, but he started to become obsessed with image and youth and all these things. And as he started to get older, he just kind of became very interesting because he would wear lots of makeup and try to hold on to that youth. There's a Andy Warhol film about him that you can even see on YouTube, where he just films him trying to perform, but he's 70 and he can barely like stand up, and he's trying to put on this costume and he's struggling, and it's really quite hard, like it's quite horrible, but also beautiful at the same time. And this is a person who was aiming to be that. And then he had 10 people at his funeral. So he went from being the most famous person to like basically knowing no one knowing anything about this person at all. And I just thought, like, that legacy, we're not needing legacies anymore. We're needing change. We're needing concepts. We're needing critique. So what I'm more interested in is how can I affect dance history, or what's happening in the industry of dance. And so one of the things I've been doing, well, that's also why I went into education, because I thought I could, as a teacher, I could influence the shift, mm-hmm. or be a part of growing the generation that's going to continue to shift that. But also it's something I think about in my curatorial practice. So I have a very strong curatorial practice, as you saw in my show, and I've curated other programs, but I've also been a dance programmer. And I just felt like actually the way the system is in the UK at the moment with education, it's really problematic in a sense, in a way that we are teaching and what the universities, how they're teaching and turn them into businesses, that I'm also kind of have been like thinking, well, maybe I need to move into into programming in a theater or a festival as another side job, because that's where also shift in the industry will happen. And it's funny, I apply all the time to all the jobs that come up, and including I just applied to I didn't get accepted, but I just applied to the English National Ballet's artistic director position, but I think one of the reasons I don't get past headhunters is because I always send a cover letter that states how I want to undo the hierarchical systems within these classical companies, and try to build non-hierarchical systems where people are not titles but names, and there is the gender gaps in wages and treatment can be shifted and changed and try to be more visible and transparent. And I kind of basically write a manifesto all these jobs. And maybe one day someone will offer me that job, but literally I never get even an interview. So
but I love that transparency though in your approach, because I think when things align, I'm sure that someone will really appreciate that, and it will be your time,
It will be, but I just feel like we need people who are at all levels, not just teaching, but also in these big theaters and festivals and stuff that are changing, because it's important. It's important. Everyone's playing a role in how dance history is contextualized. Reviewers who are reviewing performances are really contextualizing the work. The theoreticians who are writing about it, like we're making the work. And one of the things I started to do with my own work was not try to, even though I say my work is about forming an image, I also I allow for that image to just be what it is. And you say this multi-level thing, and I actually consider my work to be multi-level. I got really harsh criticism once where someone said, I think you're trying to perform the artist and you're too serious and you should have more fun with your work. Oh, wow. And ever since I started having more fun with my work, it's been a bit more successful. And so I tried to have this level where people can just enjoy it, but then if people sit with it, then then they can start to see and unpick the concepts. And I think that that's important in the industry. And that's where I don't think of it as legacy, but I think I need to be participating in creating dialogues, or participating in dialogues, or pushing others that I know to be seen, so that their dialogue, the right dialogue, can happen. Janine, there's an artist here in the UK named Janine Harrington, and she has a beautiful text about this. I make all my students read it. Anyone who ever, I mention it in everything I ever write about or speak about or anything, but it's all about that. It's about this kind of non-hierarchical, radical, non-symmetrical advocacy, so that we need to advocate for each other. We need to, if we find ourselves at the seat of the table, then we need to open the door and bring others to the table, even if it's just saying a name. And it's very important just to say someone's name. And I found myself in my own work, or in my own conversations, acknowledging or recognizing myself when I choose to say a name of an artist or a festival or theater, and when I choose to talk about something but not name that person. And I think it's important to stop, to not name people, and to start putting other names into people's ears. So I think we can still talk about them. There are artists that I can talk about, artists I have worked with, I can talk about, that are important to talk about, but I don't think it's important to name them, because we need to stop seeing them because they're part of the problem. The same thing that, like, it's kind of interesting, this whole Jan Fabre issue that's happening at the moment, and the great work that group engagement was doing in Brussels to bring that to light. And I think, great, we've done it, Jan Fabre. So let's now stop saying his name and start saying names of people who are doing the right work.
Sure.
Yeah. So that's
to expand. Yeah, to expand and to allow the momentum to take place with with that reach of different names, I guess.
Completely.
To move with it. Yeah.
I also just was like, why isn't people, like, I know I'm not going to talk too much about politics in another sense, but I was like, why don't people just stop saying Trump's name? Like, why do we just not say it? Like, stop saying it. So, like, I know you're trying to report how bad he is, but stop saying it. And I do that in my own practice and that's part of not leaving a legacy, because I don't think I am a person who needs a legacy, but I do think that I can be a part of a movement or a shift. And I think that shift needs to be saying names of the right people, not just the people who have the money and the say. And it's interesting because you go to festivals and, like, every festival, this summer, you could go to any festival in Europe and you're going to see Anna Teresa de Keersmacher piece. You're going to see something. You're going to go to every ballet company and you're going to see a Forsyth or a Whelan, and it's like, yeah, but why not this? And why not that? And in my show in Sadler's, it was really important to me to present work by artists who had not been seen in London.
Yes, I appreciated that, actually. There were some really interesting artists and names that were new as well to many, I'm sure.
Yeah, and that's why we made the the whole thing was about a CD, and so each of those works were tracks on a track list, and those tracks have an artist, and so and you walk in, and after you've heard Christopher Matthews' track, you go into Nashika Nezarel's track, and then you'll go into Janine Harrington's track, and then you end up to Benji Ra's track, and so I really wanted to highlight names, and for me it's about curation. I always say curation is a social act for me. It's about creating a dinner party, and who are the artists or the artworks that need to dialogue with each other, and that's how I curate. And that, to me, is a part of developing shifts and conversations. Is doing that, is bringing the artists together, even if it's just bringing their works in the same room or in nearby rooms. Yeah. I'm sorry, I can talk a lot.
No, honestly, please don't apologize. Please don't apologize. Yeah, I keep going silent.
I don't apologize for my work. I'm just like, I can go in many, I'm like a tree. I have some friends where I'm like, here's the center trunk of our conversation, but there are branches that go off.
Yeah. But this is nice. It's nice. It's like we speak a similar language, I think, in many ways. And I actually just forgot that I was recording a podcast for a second there. And I suddenly thought, oh, hang on, that's now my turn to speak. And I forgot that I had to do that. But no, it is fascinating. I hope that the listeners, are enjoying this as much as I am hearing you say it. And I think that it would be lovely for us to connect more. And we're more than happy, I'm sure, through the exchange to connect. And I think there is something really beautiful, what you just said about the curation, and that the curating is a dialogue and a way of arranging a dinner party. It's so true. And what more is a networking event in some ways than a dinner party,
I also host, I have this series called A Queer House Party.
Lovely.
And queer house parties are, for me, it was kind of a place, well, it came from a Hannah Gadsby quote, where do the quiet queers party? And I just felt like not everybody wants to go out, but also, how do we create intimacy in homes or intimate spaces? And also for certain people, like coming from being a person from a working class background and being, identifying as queer and also neurodivergent, where certain sensorial things are amazing and not amazing, and other people who have different neurodiversities, sensorial things completely change their aspect of life. And so I thought, how do we create a situation, an experience? I guess another phrase I use, just a little side conversation, another phrase I use about my work is that I want people to experience dance, not watch dance. And so these house parties are ways for to open up a space where people can just come to be who they are. And I invite artists to participate, but I call them hosts, and everyone hosts the event. And so everyone has to participate in being a host. So artists will make activities. So like I did one with the Victorian Albert. Well, I did one with the Victorian Albert Museum, which was centered around. One thing I also want to say is that some of these, I want to deinstitutionalize spaces with these parties.
Sure.
And so, how to make, how do people who don't feel comfortable going to the V&A, because it has this history behind it, how do I soften those spaces? And through making it more like a home atmosphere. And so, the one I did at the V&A, it was about activities around the home. So there was some artists who were helping people made their homemade wallpaper, or people did knitting together. I'm hosting another one that's completely around craft. So we're going to be crafting all night, and it's kind of a sleepover. Some of them are sleepovers, some of them are just happen during just the kind of party hour. But it's about having this activities that are about creating just spaces and dialogue. And partying is dancing, as I said, I do have this history of club. I was a raver, so I used to be really into clubbing. And so there is always sometimes an aspect of clubbing in my work. So like I made those discos in the dressing rooms at Sadler's Wells. And that's for me, but how do I want to party now? Or how do I create softer partying? And partying is a form of dancing. And you also choreograph a situation through elements of time, space, energy that allows people to interact and have an experience. So it's a cross between choreography and curation and deinstitutionalizing spaces. So it's really, for me, these are quite special events. I did a sleepover one last year, and it was a movie night. And we watched Dirty Dancing from a queer lens. And in the morning, like, people didn't want to leave. They were just like, it was beautiful. But I was like, you gotta go.
It's like this podcast.
Completely. But is there anything else you want to ask me?
No, do you know what? There are so many other things. And I think we've spoken a lot. There's a lot for people to digest. And I think totally. It's been an absolute pleasure, honestly, Chris, talking to you and hearing more about your world and your mind and your work and your quest to not necessarily leave a legacy, but definitely to impact and to help to inspire a shift within within several aspects of the industry, actually. And so that really does inspire me, and you've refreshed you have you've re-inspired my own direction, which is lovely. So from a personal perspective,
when I came to BIDE, I just that's how I came to BIDE. I was who is this, and who I meet, and just then, and how is that part of a dialogue? Because I originally wanted to move. I was going to move to Spain at that time, and I thought, how do I start to just meet the scene and get dialogue with these people? And that's what's one of the beautiful things about BIDE. It just aligns with my work around of coming together and experiencing and just finding a place or a space, making a safe space for everyone to talk and to
coexist and to share and to to see. To almost be quite present in that, I think, and to explore ideas as they come. And there's an openness, hopefully, that we can continue to share and to develop and to grow with the reach. And it's nice actually, because we had we hosted the exchange last year, but it was relatively small, because obviously with the pandemic, we like everybody, just getting back into live events. And it's really exciting. We've just launched the registration for the Exchange 22 in Barcelona. So we've got the dates now. So you're more than welcome to come and join us. We would love to see you there. And if not there, then I'm sure we will, reconnect and look at other ways of continuing this connection. It would be fantastic. I'm going to say a huge thank you to you for this podcast, Chris. And like I say, we'll hopefully hear from you in the future. But it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I wish you all the best with your works that you're creating at the moment. Obviously, your trilogy and your trio. Please do keep us posted about where things when things are happening and where people can experience your work, and we will share for you.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you ever so much. And thank you for tuning in to the BIDE podcast.